Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome to the Networking RX podcast. I am your host, Frank Agan, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today I have another great guest. Actually, this is going to be a lot of fun, but as our ongoing subscribers know, often on this podcast, I'll be sharing ideas, insights, and best practices for professional relationships. I'm getting ahead of myself here and excelling at business networking, but occasionally I have great people on here to talk. These are people out there. Sometimes they're authors, speakers, thought leaders. Sometimes they're people who've just kind of been in the trenches, but they can share their knowledge to help us be more successful. Today I have on here Matt Baxter, and Matt's, the bio he gave me is this: professional scatterbrain, author, podcast, entrepreneur. He sounds more important than AKA sounds more important than he actually is. He has the greatest golden retriever in the world, Penelope. But you know, I was, and that's great, Matt. We'll jump into that. But I'm reading your LinkedIn here. Started a lawn care business as a chubby neighborhood kid between the ages of 15 and 21. Hired 25 plus people, built a company to 7 full-time employees. Obviously, have gotten out of that. You're kind of in the HR space now. Welcome to the program. This is going to be fun. I had fun the first time we talked.
Exactly. Thank you for having me. I think you mentioned we probably could have recorded the first time we chatted, which is awesome. So I'm excited to be here. This will be a blast.
Yeah. I guess, how'd you get into the lawn care business? When we first were talking, it was like, okay, I meet a lot of people. And then at some point, how the relationships really built into how you started the business, how you kept that business going, you sold it, and now you're into this new space. So if you kind of want to give us a little tour of the chubby kid.
Happy to. So I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Go Blue. I got to say it. Go Blue.
Yes. Finally, somebody understands that. Go Blue.
Yep.
Right from there. Yep. And so the neighborhood that I lived in, imagine sort of upper middle class homes, all an acre size. Some of them were on a lake. And so my dad had a nice mower sitting in the garage. I went and knocked on one day I was like, well, Dad, if I use the mower and fill it up with gas, can I, use this to potentially go most of people's lawns? Started knocking on a bunch of people's doors, shut in the face. And finally some guy who knew my dad actually was like, yeah, go ahead. Why don't you mow today? And if I like it, I'll probably have you do some spring cleanup. We'll go from there. So that was the first lawn right on the lake, beautiful property. And through the years, I kind of progressively started doing all these lawns along this lake. I had probably 25 in this one neighborhood in particular. And then I think I got up to the point where we were doing about 70 full-time accounts all the time. But the fun part sort of in the tailoring this to the relationship side. So this guy who first said yes owned a funeral home. So he owned this nice house on the lake, always showed off all these Mercedes and blah, blah, blah. But his profession was a funeral home director. So first time mowed, apparently I did a good enough job. He had me keep doing it. I think it was more because I was cheaper than the last guy, so he could save some money. But then he said, hey, do you want to come mow the funeral home? Okay. Yeah. So through the years, the irony of this was every time, a weird thing for 15, 16, 17-year-old kid, every time somebody in the community died, I had job security because he would call me the night before and say, hey, I've got a funeral. Can you come mow? So I started reading the obituaries in any newspaper, and it meant I had job security and that whole thing. So it's a funny kind of ironic thing that I never knew I was going to have to deal with. But then his neighbor happened to own 10 Wendy's. So 2, 3, 4 years go by, and the guy finally walked over and he said, hey, will you start, mowing my lawn when we're on vacation? I kind of like doing it, but why don't we do it on vacation? Then one day he goes, all right, why don't you take a drive with me and let's go quote all the Wendy's. And so, the last 2 years of owning the lawn care company, I had like 10 Wendy's accounts. So we did all the landscaping. We did all the, all the lawn care for, which is an amazing experience, that was like a true commercial account.
Yeah.
And so It was a wild experience. So I owned it for 6 years. From 15 was kind of when I first started mowing a couple lawns, called a company, but it was like 2 or 3 lawns. And then by the time I was 21, so I was a sophomore going into my junior year in college, I kept the business going. So I went to college about 3 years away from where I grew, or excuse me, about 3 hours away from where I grew up, Ann Arbor, and then west side of the state. I was back and forth. So my senior year of high school, I hired basically a full-time guy to say, hey, from spring and the fall, I'm not going to be here. And during the summer times, I'm going to need quite a bit of help. And so that's where the business grew. And then sort of the transition out of that was, a year or two later, sophomore going into junior year, I got approached by a local conglomerate that said, hey, if you ever want to sell your accounts, let's talk about that. And I said, well, let me buy a beer. I'd love to have that conversation. And there was a lot of interest in, if you want me to get in the weeds, I'm happy to, but with lawn care, it's the lawn mowing is cash flowing. All the sort of fat is the landscaping and the hardscaping. And we didn't do much of that. So it was a pretty attractive business to come by. Plus I was kind of, it was getting challenging of how big it was getting, plus being back and forth quite a bit. So it was a perfect timing for all that. So that's kind of the history behind my landscaping company from 15 to 21. So,
well, you had to learn a lot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of people that I went to college with that their first full-time job was their first job. And I have this conversation with my kids. They talk about their coworkers not showing up, and we still see it today. And, they've understand that, my wife and I, we didn't give them a pass, right? You got to work.
Yeah.
And you worked.
That's one thing both my parents basically said was like, we don't really care what job you have. You just need to do something. And the fact that I, whether it was, working for another company or starting my own, they didn't really care either way. Obviously they were supportive as the lawn care started to take off. You learn obviously that literally grassroots of customer satisfaction. The customer isn't always right, but sometimes it's like when you're mowing 70 people's different lawns, you have some that care. They come out and they measure the blade of the grass to the detail. And some are like, oh, I didn't even know you mowed last week. Mm-hmm. And so there's such a wide range of people that you start to learn. And that industry in general is a fascinating one. And you kind of build relationships that are, last a lifetime. But then I think one of the biggest things that's transferable is certainly people interactions. Certainly, like, there's nothing better than if you have an issue, showing up, knocking on somebody's door and say, hey, how can I fix this? Some of the stresses you learn is, when you've got employees who are mowing and you're not there and you get a call saying, hey, we have an issue and I can't, like, if I was on vacation or I was gone and I couldn't fix it, that's a gut wrenching problem that you just learn on how to solve that. And it ups your intensity of the sort of skill set and what the deliverable that you're holding, employees accountable to, which is something that I'm excited to always have. And, obviously I hope to always deliver excellence, and whether it's podcasting, a book, the new, the business that I have now, or mowing lawns, whatever it is. So it's certainly, you learn a lot in that space.
Yeah. That you use the word gut wrenching. It's interesting. It's just a lawn, and whatever can be, it's like a haircut. I always tell, I hope I didn't screw up your haircut. No, you can't. It grows back, right? It just grows back.
Yep.
You can't screw up a haircut. Temporarily you can, but long-term you can't. Same thing with a lawn. You can fix it, and anything
exactly
you can fix.
Right.
But you have those gut-wrenching moments. And how did you find the people to work in the lawn care bit? With these, I have this image of all your buddies wanting to come work for you, right?
There was a lot of that, because I paid cash and paid pretty well, and they're working for their buddies. So as long as you did good work and showed up, I was pretty loose. You could listen to music, you could, drink Mountain Dew, do what, ride in the truck, whatever you wanted to go do. So pretty much it mainly started with buddies. And then my dad owned a farm in the town that I grew up, where we had some horses, and he had some guys in and out who helped. And so it kind of evolved to, it was perfect to have them help out with that and then do the lawn care on the side. So it worked out really well. So yeah, it's kind of all over. And then once, buddies have buddies, and so you can start to hire friends and stuff like that. So it worked out well. Now, certainly learned a lot of lessons of what it's like to hold friends accountable. It changes things for sure. But
that was my question, is like, did you ever have issues with, or what were the issues where you got a friend working with you, and you would think your friends would step up for you.
Yeah.
And many of them would. But many would play the friend card, right?
Exactly. You learn the ones who are the close friends and get it, and you learn the ones who are just there to be there. And certainly the relationship changes. I mean, there's nothing more awkward or challenging if it evolves to be than you have a friend who works for you who provides something to a customer. The customer calls you and says, I'm not satisfied. Pick up the phone and call on your friend and say, here's the issue. Here's what went wrong. Could you have fixed this? Or what? I mean, those are conversations that are just hard to have. And I'm still terrible at them, but they're difficult. So, I mean, I've hired friends, I've fired friends. I've had a partner in this current business that I had to buy out that started as a friend. I mean, so I for as basically been doing it for, I've been an entrepreneur since 15 and I'm 28 now. So 13 years I've haven't learned my lesson yet. And it's certainly a challenge in a lot of different capacities, and sometimes it works out to be the greatest thing in the world. Like you said, if you've got a friend who's not afraid to step up and you've got a friend who gets what you're trying to do, it's a special thing for sure.
Yeah. Well, when I started out with what's now AmSpirit Business Connections, I had a buddy who went in with me, and we just had a different mindset. He great guy. I was in his wedding, he was in mine. Great guy, but just from a work standpoint, I was all about growing it, and he was all about, hey, how do we ride this thing into the ground? Maximize the money and do nothing. It's like, that's not what I'm about.
That's the hardest thing too, is when they're good, they're good people, right?
Yeah.
And you work differently, and that's almost, I gotta imagine you probably have seen this more than I have, but majority of the issues you run into is good friend, great. It's all good when it's exciting, but then when it gets challenging is when you start to see a different attitude to things.
Yeah. Well, I remember kind of I still love him to death, but the end of it was, and we parted on a very positive way. I bought him out. Everything was fine. But he said, I just don't want to work as hard as you. Well, I don't know what else there is, right? Because good looks doesn't get you much. We're not in the modeling business. We didn't really need money. It was like we needed work, and thinking. And those are the two things I don't know. You figure it out. It's like, wow, that's why I came to you with the question. Exactly right. It became frustrating. So now you've talk about Wedge a little bit and Wedge HR and what you're doing, how that's transitioned. I know networking plays a huge part in that, and just kind of share your secrets, if you will.
Yeah. So, natural transition, you go from mowing lawns to HR tech, as most people do. So so sold my lawn care, had a 10-day long road trip with my dad out to Jackson Hole, had a lot of time in the car. So my dad came from the medical world and hired a lot of, assistants and dental hygienists. And so we just kind of started talking, and I was reflecting a little bit. All right, what made that lawn care work? And one thing I hired pretty well, and was mainly like, I didn't care if somebody knew how to mow a lawn or weed whacked. I cared, can you shake my hand? Can you have a conversation? Can I feel comfortable putting you in front of customers? If we can do that, I can teach you the rest. And he basically had the same thing. Like, yes, there's, with a dental hygienist, for example, they have to go to a certain degree of school, but
sure,
less around the experience, more around, can I feel comfortable putting this in front of patients, or this person in front of patients? And so started thinking about this more. And, the premise for Wedge came about as, I wanted to create a platform that allowed companies to have better insights into who people are in the earliest stages of hiring, and candidates have an opportunity to shine above and beyond resumes and cover letters. Started talking to all these employers, and everybody says the same thing, like, resumes suck, hiring is hard, finding good people is difficult. And I talked to all my friends at the time who are, sophomores, juniors, seniors in college, and I'm applying for this job. I have my resume. I don't really have a whole lot of experience. How can I show that I'm motivated or hungry or willing to learn? And just felt like there was a gap in the market. And so, like the lawn mowing, started knocking on some doors. Same thing with the concept for Wedge was, let's see if we can start to solve this. And the more and more we started talking about this, more and more validation we got. And so we built the platform. We built a platform as an asynchronous or a one-way video interview tool. This was an idea in a napkin 6 years ago. Asynchronous is, technical jargon for one way or on demand. company sets up a series of questions. Candidates respond to those questions on video. They can be custom questions, job questions. They could be generic emotional intelligence questions. But the idea is we oftentimes replace that entry-level phone screen. So you get a candidate that applies, then typically the next stage would be let's phone screen or bring them in for an interview, or in post-COVID world or COVID world, a Zoom call. Well, there's a lot of time, money, energy, effort put into getting people, for a lot of them that don't show up, different person on a resume, all these different things. And so we wanted to create not necessarily a platform that got rid of resumes and not necessarily a platform that got rid of interviews, but can we create a more efficient process that allows candidates to shine above and beyond resumes, and for companies to understand that in the earliest stage? So we are in the HR tech world, or in the software world, we're a SaaS product, software as a service. We sell that product to HR and talent acquisition departments. We oftentimes integrate with their existing solutions that might be called an applicant tracking system or an HRIS solution. So we've grown in that. Obviously, COVID was a nice boost because everything shifted towards video, and we just happened to be in the right place at the right time 3-4 years later. We also have a talent attraction arm where we help companies basically say, look, you're trying to find people, you're spending a lot of money trying to advertise those jobs. We can help basically be your media buyer and your media purchaser to drive candidates to you. If we can do that, obviously the need for video interviewing skyrockets in both fronts. So it's been a wild ride. So I started it when I was in college, and probably one of the best networking stories that I have is, so I was pretty involved in some of the business departments at my college. I wasn't necessarily the best student, but I was involved. And so I got one of the advancement officers for the college that I went to. He knew what I was trying to do, and he was fired up. And obviously he had numbers he had to hit from raising. So he didn't mind sort of using me as bait a little bit to reach out to an alumni and say, hey, this is a Hope College student trying to run a business. So I got introduced to a gentleman named William Van Fossen. So William is one of our investors, been with me for 5.5, 6 years. He sits on our board. But basically the conversation teed up as, hey, I want you to meet this alumni, tell him your story, and just get to know him. He's a great guy. So Bill picks up the phone and he goes, all right, you got 3 minutes. Give me 2 minutes of your background, and then give me 1 minute of what you're trying to do. So I was like, all right, rattled it off. He's like, all right, thanks. That's all I need to hear. End of the call. I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. It was kind of one of those, like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And so, 3 days later, I get an email from him saying, hey, can you talk? Yeah, sure. And so at this point, I'm like, I don't even know what to prepare for now. And he basically said, so I like what you're trying to do. I see something here, and I'm in a space that I don't mind making some early on investments, and they might not pan out. They might pan out, but how are you planning on capitalizing this? And I said, quite frankly, I've never thought about that. I said, I've got a little bit of money myself. He goes, it's not going to last you that long. He's like, and don't burn all your personal cash. He said, I'd like to make an investment if you're interested. Okay. And so we, within 2 or 3 minutes, kind of, I'm going to throw out terms, and here's some dough that we need. And he ended up writing me a check, and it was, kind of our first round of capital that I tripped into. I really had no idea, but, one thing kind of reflecting back on that is, from a networking standpoint, I mean, certainly the obvious one is like leverage college institutions. If you went there, there's nothing better than, hey, I went to Hope College is where I went. Hey, I went to Hope, or I went to U of M, and people are willing to support each other. Obviously that's a common one. I certainly also have learned you have different advantages at different ages and stages of your life. And so one advantage that I had was I think I was not necessarily a charity case, but I'm young, I'm hungry, and I want to go try to do this a little bit crazy.
Right.
And so I had a lot of people say, there's nothing more that would make me feel good than helping financially support you on your dream, even if it doesn't pan out. We think it's a good idea because there's a lot of ideas like this. We think it's a good idea, but also, so from a networking standpoint, I sort of pitched as like, here's the story. Here's what I want to go try to do. It's a big swing, and there's a lot we can fail, but there's no better time than what we're trying to go do now. And it was remarkable how many people loved and supported that story. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have a strong investor base who are relatively successful guys and gals who said, look, we want to take a swing. We either know the space and we want to support, or you know what, we don't mind supporting somebody willing to take a swing. And so, and you sort of, once you're in the network, you kind of are in the network, meaning friends
Yeah.
of friends of friends and friends, and the introductions just start to come. And obviously you got to deliver good work, and you got to be honest, and you got to be trustworthy, and you got to be all these things. But at the same time, people like seeing people win. And I think people like seeing sort of not necessarily the underdog, but people like saying, supporting people who are not afraid to go after it. And I feel the same way. I get fulfilled when I hear somebody's like, hey, I want to launch this company. Awesome. What can I do to help? I don't even care if I get anything out of it. You're the same way. I mean, you're willing to support people all the time. So very long-winded way of saying that's kind of the start of the wedge journey all the way to a little bit where we're at today.
No, I think that's powerful. The message I really get from that is, there's a lot there, but obviously the person in the advancement office was willing to take a chance. There was probably a little bit of self-serving there, and that's, that's okay. Right. That's, we all kind of use each other. I needed somebody to be on a podcast. So you're here, right? I mean,
exactly right.
And it helps you. And it goes both ways. But once you have, William Van Fossen in your camp, it's easier to get the next person. Oh, exactly. William's in. Okay. Yep. Right. Yep. It's just, and so you don't screw that first one up. That first one's really important.
Yep, that's exactly right. And have you ever seen The Big Short, the movie?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So one of my favorite scenes in any movie that I'm not really like this moment changed my life type of guy. I don't like the cliche like that, but truly one of my favorite scenes that has shaped the way I kind of view the world is Vinny, when he's about to put the trade into place to basically short. He calls whoever it is, Ryan Gosling or whoever, and he goes, all right, so we're going to do this. But before we do this, I need to know, how are you effing me? And he goes, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, you wouldn't just walk in the door and do this for no reason. He goes, well, to be honest, man, the size of the check you're going to write me, it would really piss you off. But in comparison to how much you're about to go make, it's peanuts. And he goes, that's what I'm doing this. And he goes, all right, I buy that. And so that has shaped the way that I sort of, everybody's self-serving in their own way. It's not always bad. And in fact, a lot of times it's a very good thing. And how you can sort of, as manipulative as it sounds, use that at the stage that people are in, I think oftentimes can really benefit. Like I've learned from partners or people that I interact with from a business sense, like not everybody necessarily needs to get paid on a introduction. Certainly I want to offer that all the time, and I want to extend that, but some people are, I want to help this business grow, or I want to help take that competitor down, or I know this person a part of your team and I want to see them be successful. So I don't mind. Like, yes, people want compensation, but also sometimes it's a feel good thing. And that's where, for a guy like Bill, early stage investment is not going to change his portfolio if it skyrockets or if it fails, but it's a feel good opportunity also as an investment that I think, so starting to sort of understand the thesis of where somebody's coming from when it comes to, that idea around what is self-serving for them and what's helping them. And once you know that, it gets really easy to work together with people.
Yeah. Well, you start to get an appreciation for different values of money. I mean, there are people out there who need money to eat, right?
Yep.
And then there are people out there because they want to have nice things. And then there are people out there where money for them it's just an affirmation that they're doing good things.
Yep.
And I think that's where we're successful people want to get. Some people get stuck on I just need to eat every day. And some people I just want a new car every 3 years. But somebody like, Bill Van Fossen or William Van Fossen he's at that stage where it's like, yeah, you know what? I'll never be wanting for a meal or a new car. But I want these good feelings. So let's shift gears here to kind of wrap up. What would be some good referrals, some good introductions for you? I guess the type of company that really would benefit from Wedge HR.
Yeah. And I obviously appreciate the opportunity on that. We sort of serve two very distinct clients. Number one is I've got a boatload of applicants or a lot of resumes that I got to fly through, and it's time sucking, time consuming, whether it's reviewing resumes, phone screens, interviews. We can help service them all day long. And especially we can help reduce your time to fill of, let's say an applicant comes in, by the time they're working, that might be 60 days. Our job is to come in and bring that down to 32, 30 days, cut it in half, whatever it may be. So certainly if you've got a volume of candidates or high volume hiring, we can help all day long. The other client we can serve, or the other group that we can serve, is you're struggling to find candidates, you don't mind allocating budget to drive towards candidates, you just don't know how to do that, that's where we can come in and help. So we can help be your partner, not only to drive candidates, through your application, and also to screen them on both fronts. And sometimes they're the same client, sometimes they're separate, but either way. So we end up working with a lot of high volume, high turnover, anything that's customer facing, sales roles. We don't necessarily touch executive roles, but anything sort of mid-market and hourly work wage, we can help all day long. So obviously love to service those, but I love connecting with companies. Even if we can't directly help you, I'll try my best to make introductions that can, the network effect. So yeah, happy to help anybody that we possibly can.
Best way to get a hold of you or learn more is through wedgehr.com.
Yep, that's right. And then I'm on LinkedIn as well too. So if anybody wants to follow me along on LinkedIn, I'm pretty loud and obnoxious, as you've probably seen a little bit. So happy to connect on there and be of any help I possibly can.
All you need to do is do a search on LinkedIn for chubby neighborhood kid with lawn care business.
All you need. There's only a few of us.
Hey, Matt, I really appreciate your time today. This was a lot of fun. I assume every time I talk to you will be fun. So thank you.
Right back at you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.